Hello everybody, I'm BillehBawb from BVR, and this is the ultimate rec room climbing tutorial. I am going to teach you how you can go from being an absolute beginner who has never climbed before to being a pro who can outspeed and outclass anybody else who's climbing with you. This video is split into multiple parts, so right here on the timeline on YouTube or whatever, you should be able to hover over it and see the different sections. We're about to get into the beginner section, and then we're going to have the advanced section later. Before we get into the actual tutorial part though, let's go over some very basic information about climbing. In the Stunt Runner update, the game obviously added Stunt Runner, but along with that, it had the new mechanic in climbing. Now, climbing is used in Stunt Runner to climb up these rope walls, but also they gave creators the ability to set their own objects to be climbable. And this very quickly spawned quite a few rooms dedicated to parkour and rock climbing walls. Instead of the whole surface of the wall being climbable like in Stunt Runner, most good rock climbing walls have different holds that are grabbable that you have to put yourself between. They basically just try and mimic real life climbing walls, and some of these can get very high. So, climbing. Where do you even begin? It's really pretty simple. You go up to a hold, you put your hand up to it, and you pull the trigger, and then boom, you've grabbed it. From there, you can keep holding onto that grip, put your hand down to move your body upwards, and then reach up with your other hand, grab onto the next grip, and then let go of your old one, and boom, you just climbed up. It really is that simple to get into climbing right away. But obviously, actually getting good at climbing takes a little bit more knowledge and skill than that, and also most climbing courses you'll come across won't be that easy. So here are some of the biggest issues that I see beginners having with climbing walls. Number one is not properly grabbing onto the grip you're trying to go to. If you ever reach out for a grip, pull the trigger, and then let go of your old one, and then just fall, and it seems like your hand just kind of phased through the other grip you were trying to grab, then this is what I'm talking about. Grips can come in many different shapes and sizes, but as a general rule, you want to try and keep your hand parallel to the grip you're trying to grab onto. This rule gets broken sometimes with different shapes, which we'll talk about in a second, but this is especially true for squares. Squares are the most common grip you'll find on most rock walls, and the best way to grab onto them reliably is to put your hand parallel to the face facing towards you and then just grab on. With squares, you can also usually grab the corners like this if you put your hand at it like this, and you can also grab edges of squares in a very similar way. Do note though that there's some square faces you can't grab onto. Sometimes it's because there's not enough room to grab onto, and sometimes it's because the angle is weird and facing upwards or downwards at a very weird angle. Here you can see me trying to grab onto the top part of this square, and despite my hand being parallel to it, I can't grab onto it. So it's usually just a much safer bet to try and grab the face that is just sticking out from the wall. But what if you have a hold and there is no face sticking out from the wall like that? Well, that gets into our second most common type of grip, the triangle. Now, the triangle is literally just a square, but it's rotated so that the corner is sticking out instead of a face. All of the same grabbing rules for squares apply here because they are squares just rotated. You can grab onto the faces if they're big enough, but for smaller triangles especially, it's generally the best idea to grab onto the corner like this. Like squares, you can also grab onto the edges, and sometimes if there's a face that's going up at a weird angle, you won't be able to grab it. And for larger triangles, depending on what part's close to it, might be the best idea to grab onto a face instead of an edge. The next most common type of shape is the cone or the pyramid. These are usually used in climbing courses where you're kind of hanging down from the ceiling and they're like stalactites. There's two good ways to grab onto pyramids. One is that if enough of a face is revealed and it's far down enough and it's a rather large stalactite, you can usually just grab onto the faces of it. Again though, you do have to watch out because some of these can be angled weird, especially if they're upside down like this. The more reliable option that also works on smaller ones that you can't grab the faces on is if you grab the very bottom of it like this. Just imagine you're stabbing the center of your hand with the very tip of the pyramid and then you grab onto it. So those three shapes are probably going to be the most common ones you see in 90% of well-designed rock walls. But you'll see that right behind me there's some circles, and yes, sometimes other shapes are used. And a general rule for these is to remember that they have the same hitbox as a square most of the time. You should be able to grab onto most faces of these other shapes just fine as long as you remember that it's kind of like a square. But finding out what parts of shapes work best for you is something that only comes through experience. This last little section of the video was just supposed to be a good jumping off point for you so you know exactly where to get started. So the next biggest issue I see with climbing beginners is falling off in places you really shouldn't be. And I know that sounds kind of really weird and don't fall, but let me explain. As long as you keep at least one hand on at least one hold at all times, you will not fall off a wall. If you're just a beginner starting, you always want to make sure you have at least one hand holding on to something. Sometimes beginners will be climbing a wall and they reach out for the next hold and they think they have a grip on it, but they actually don't, and their hand goes right through it, which the last section should have helped you with, but anyways. And then before they actually have a grip on the next hold, they let go of the one under them because they think they are already holding on to the next grip, and then they fall and lose. It might take going a little bit slower and having a little bit more patience, but if you're just starting, it's very important that you make sure that you have a grip on the next hold before you let go of the previous one. As long as you do that, there is literally no way for you to fall because it's guaranteed safety as long as you you always are holding on to something, so just remember that and take it slow. But you'll find that on some especially harder climbing courses that there's some holds that you can't just reach by reaching out with your arms. And this leads us into our last beginner tip, throwing. Throwing is a little bit more advanced and it's really scary, especially your first couple times you gotta do it, and especially if you're high up on a course and you feel like you might fall. But I'm still putting it in the beginner section because it's still really important for getting started on climbing courses. All you have to do to throw yourself up is grab onto a grip that you want to throw yourself from, and then while you're holding onto the grip, throw your hand down and let go at the very bottom, and then reach up with your other hand to the next grip, and hopefully you went far enough to grab it. When I see a lot of people throwing, I see themselves just trying to throw themselves up as fast as they can, and that does work, but I don't think it's the best way to do it. You do need good speed, yes, but you also want to make sure that you balance it out with the smoothness of your motion. If your throws are really quick, jittery, and stuttery, you're more likely to fail, whereas if your movements are a lot more smooth yet still fast at the same time, you'll get into a rhythm a lot easier. You also want to make sure you have a good power behind your throw to get as far as you can. A lot of climbing courses only have very occasional throws, so it's just something you have to know how to do. It's not something you have to have mastered yet. And again, the best way to go and get a feel for throwing is to just go and do it yourself on a whole bunch of different rock walls. So there we go. That's about all the basics you need to know for climbing rock walls. You should now be able to do most easy or medium difficulty courses, and maybe even some harder courses as well. Just remember to make sure that you're grabbing onto the right faces of the objects, that you're always holding on to at least something, especially if you're more uncomfortable, and that you decently know how to throw yourself when it's needed for the course. Again, the best way to get better at climbing is to just do it a lot on a bunch of different courses. This video itself isn't automatically going to make you a master climber, it's just here to provide a foundation for you to go out and practice on. If you're an absolute beginner at climbing and just want some really easy courses as well as some introduction courses for absolute beginners, then I would recommend Sky High Climbing. It has some really good very beginner courses, and a lot of their full courses are rather easy as well. If you're a little bit more advanced and already feel pretty comfortable throwing and climbing and all of that, then I'd recommend Rec Rock Climbing. They have a lot of really good courses that are decently long and also have some good challenge to them. And currently I am working on my own climbing room, ClimbingParkRR. This is going to have courses for beginners and experts alike, but we'll talk more about that room at the end of the video. So if you're still here, you're probably interested in becoming a pro at climbing. The best way to become a pro is to really just do a whole bunch of different courses and become comfortable with it, but I'm going to give you some pointers on how you can get faster and faster at climbing. With some of these tips, you might even be able to take world record times on some of your favorite climbing courses. My first tip is to get into a flow with your throws and climbing. You don't want to throw yourself too much if you're a beginner, but if you're watching this, I'm assuming you're past that point, so it's usually just best to keep throwing yourself over and over again. Basically, right when you grab onto the next grip, you want to instantly throw yourself up to the next one, then grab that, then instantly throw yourself up to the next one, and repeat. This does take a lot of time to get used to, but it's kind of a natural development of just climbing over and over again. You'll get used to it. It can also be really scary, especially if you aren't super confident in your own skills, but once you do get into that flow state of just throwing yourself over and over again, you feel really cool. So just practice pretty much not really stopping and just throwing yourself over and over again to get into that flow state and that rhythm of throwing yourself. This kind of coincides with one of the beginner tips I gave, that you want to make sure your throws are smooth yet also fast and powerful. If you do really jittery hard throws, you probably aren't going to get into that flow state. This next tip is mostly for speed, and it's also kind of related to that flow state tip. It's generally a good idea to never have two of your hands on the same hold at the same time if you're trying to go fast. Again, to do this, you have to feel very confident in your own abilities and skill, because a lot of climbers who aren't super confident in their skill won't be able to just throw themselves over and over again, and they'll have to like stop on one, then reach out and throw themselves, and then maybe stop a little bit again. Here's a clip of me climbing a mountain where I sometimes stop and put two hands on the same rock to kind of regain my composure. You'll see I'm still going pretty fast, but these pauses can add up. And then here's a comparison with the same section of this mountain where I don't ever put two hands on the same rock together. I'm still generally going the same speed, but I'm cutting out that stop and go motion, which makes me go faster. And here you can see how much faster it was without me putting two hands on the same rock ever. You might think this isn't too much, but over time, especially on longer courses, it really adds up. Especially on sections where you're climbing sideways on a wall, oftentimes you'll want to put two hands on the same rock and then reach over and then put them over there and then reach over and do it again. For sideways sections, this can be really hard, but it's important to get comfortable with just throwing yourself over and over again, even if it feels like you're about to fall because you're going sideways and you don't really have much leeway over there. This final tip for speed is to really get to know the course that you're trying to go fast on. You'll notice in this video, video that I've used a lot of footage of this snowy mountain. And that's because it's probably one of my favorite climbing courses. It's in Rec Rock Climbing. And I have a speed route mapped out on this map in my head every time I climb it for speed. Just knowing little shortcuts on the map you're climbing can help you shave off that little bit of time you need. And to know those shortcuts, you need to be pretty well acquainted with the wall you're climbing. Here, for example, you see I could throw myself over this part of the wall, walk straight forwards, grab onto this first grip, and throw myself up. Or after I go over this ledge, I could jump onto this wall, do a very short wall slide to get me just enough height I need to grab onto this much higher up and closer grip, and then throw myself up from there. In reality, that probably saves a second or less. But again, if you're going for speed, just knowing all of these little shortcuts on your favorite course can really add up. And that's about all of the advanced climbing tips I have. It's kind of hard to give advanced climbing tips that aren't just for speed, because at that point, it's just doing what you're already doing over and over again until you get really comfortable with it. So if you are a more advanced player, I still hope this helped you in some way. If you're interested in learning more about climbing or becoming a better climber, I've started a club in Rec Room that you can join. It's just called the Climbers Club, and our current clubhouse is ClimbingParkRR, that room I said I was working on earlier. As of the time of you watching this video, it really only probably has 3 or 4 courses built because this is kind of a soft launch, but I will continue to build on it and develop it over time to have more and more courses, and just other generally fun stuff to do. You can join the club by going to clubs, going to search, looking up Climbers Club here, and then it should be, yeah, here it's currently the 4th one. You'll see here, there's this other one called Rec Climbing Club with almost 400 members, and we currently have 3 because this is the announcement, basically. So the goal here is to overtake Rec Climbing Club in members, and I know that's not going to happen, but if everyone watching this video goes and joins the Climbers Club, I know we can do it. But that's going to be about all for this video. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed. I hope that you learned something and that I maybe got you more interested in climbing. It's one of my favorite parts of Rec Room, so I really just want to share it with as many people as I can, which is why I made the club. I'd like to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. You know, if you enjoyed it, there's a subscribe button right there, but, you know, no pressure. Also, I think there's a video you'll enjoy right here, so click on that if you'd like to, and that's about it. See you next time.